Welcome to the Mandala Podcast, where we help you feel your best body, mind, and soul. Welcome back, listeners. Charlie McDermott, co-host and producer with Bree Jaworski. Bree, how are you today?
Doing awesome. I can't wait to talk about some of these sneaky abusive things. Some of them are obviously like way more obvious than others, but I think some of these things are like topics that people don't really talk about as much. So I'm excited to get into this, and hopefully people listening, if this is helpful to you in any way, that would be great. You know, if you notice that any of these things are happening in your own relationship, then it would definitely be means to like take a pause and just evaluate what's going on, because some of these things are much more kind of incognito, sneaky things.
Yeah. I love the title of this episode, and as you've covered in past episodes, I found them so helpful. And a lot of folks, it's so easy to blame ourselves in relationships and say, oh, it's just me, or I'm oversensitive. And to hear it from you, at least it gives us a grounds for, well, maybe I just ought to be more aware and not just, brush it off to, well, yeah, that's just me. So this is good.
Well, and I think there's a lot of like gaslighting, which, gaslighting is not one we're going to talk about today, because that's kind of an obvious one. But yeah, just gaslighting from your partner. If they're doing some of these things, they probably are telling you you're overly sensitive and those kind of things. So so maybe some validation will come with this list. So let's get into it.
All right. Sneaky abusive traits in relationships. Number one.
So this one would be if your partner leaves you places, like if you're at a wedding and they just leave you there, or you're at a concert, or you're at a restaurant, or they lock you out of the house, something like that. So again, like something that people don't really talk about, but this can cause a huge issue if you're somewhere where you're unfamiliar, you're with people that you're not comfortable with, if your partner just like leaves you, because at the basis of abuse, domestic abuse, is power and control. So that is a perfect way for the abusive person to gain power and control over you, is just to be like, well, I'm leaving, I'm taking the car, or I'm locking you out of the house, that kind of thing. So yeah, so it's just one of those sneaky things. If you find that your partner has done this, or any of these things, or something like this, then that would definitely be a huge red flag. In fact, I brought my red flag today so I can wave it around. I'm like so obnoxious with this thing with certain clients. Like I'll like sit there and wave it around. I know I've talked about it before, but I actually brought it out today. So that would be like red flag number one.
Wow.
So moving on. So you kind of touched on this one before. So number two is name calling. So of course we know like the very obvious name calling, but things like saying you're overly sensitive, or you're stupid, or you're annoying, or things that maybe we don't think of as being like not the B word or the C word, or, those things. Those are obvious ones. But, if they're telling you you're so dramatic, or you're overly sensitive, and those kind of things. So I would look out for those kind of more subtle forms of name calling. Those would definitely be red flags to me for sure.
Yep.
And so the third one is, again, like the more obvious version of it would be physical violence. But what I'm talking about is, I'm not talking about hitting or punching, kicking, those kind of things. I'm talking about being physically violent in your presence. So this could look like breaking things in your home. It could look like punching walls, punching doors, leaving holes in the house. Things that are not as directed at you, but the thought behind it and the intimidation factor is still there. It's like, yeah, this time it was a wall, but next time it could be your face, kind of thing. So that's definitely something that's a huge red flag to me. If someone is, I used to do in-home therapy, and I would see holes in walls and holes in doors and things like that. And that's like a glaring red flag to me that there is something majorly wrong. And maybe the person has never actually put their hands on you, but it's like, what's one more step past, if they're like that capable of not or incapable of controlling their actions when they get angry, like who's to say that you couldn't be the next target, And also I think that the intimidation is part of it for that kind of thing. Like when you're breaking things or like punching holes in walls, it's like you want that intimidation factor to be there if you're that abusive person, to be for the other person to think like subconsciously like that could be me next, even if you really have any intention of moving it past that point, it's still a super, super
Yeah.
unhealthy thing.
Yep. That's good. Wow.
Yeah. So again, like just kind of more subtle things. So
Yeah.
the next one is cheating, and that one seems obvious, but I think that people need to realize that cheating is kind of bigger than the actual act of cheating. It's like a blatant disrespect of you, your relationship, what you've built, respect for your partner. So it's not just, they did something physical or maybe emotional with another person. It's more so like what that signifies to you, that they feel for you as a person, as a partner, what that means to them for your relationship. Because I kind of come up from the train of thought that there's kind of two different types of people in regards to cheating. And of course, like there's always going to be a little bit of nuance in there, but generally speaking, there's kind of people that are capable of cheating and people that are not capable of cheating. And when I say not capable, I mean like the guilt would eat them alive kind of thing.
Mm.
They would probably tell on themselves if it happened. They wouldn't be able to like live with themselves kind of
Yeah.
thing. So that's the one camp. And then the other camp is like, you know, it's not as big of a deal, and they may admit it if they're found out, but they wouldn't necessarily come clean on their own kind of thing. And that's another thing I think that we need to keep in mind for red flags is, a lot of people will say, oh, like I found out that they were cheating, but when I confronted them, they were honest about it. And I have a little bit of a problem with that because I feel like that's still not being honest. Being honest when confronted with evidence or, proof that you were doing something wrong is not necessarily being honest. That's kind of like,
Yeah.
yes, when your back's against the wall, if you're admitting to something, but like, would you have ever disclosed that information if
Yeah.
not found out to begin with? So I think we just need to like take a look at less about the actual act and like what that means, more so what that means for the person in the relationship, like
Mm.
how they view your relationship, if they're willing to like make that because most people know that that's something that if you do it, it could be kind of a non-negotiable or like an irreversible kind of thing that could damage your relationship and or end your relationship. And so I think people go into that knowing that that's a possibility, and so I think you need to think of it that way, like that person knew that this could be the end of our relationship and they may never get to be with me again, and they still chose to do that anyway. And so what does that mean for how they view me or how they view the relationship? And so this one kind of piggybacks off of that one, but number 5 is substance abuse. And so a lot of cheating I think gets blamed on substance abuse, like I was drunk or I was high, I was whatever. And I think substance abuse it's not an excuse, because regardless of if they were using or abusing substances at that point, they were still the ones that consumed those substances. So they still have to be held accountable for that. So substance abuse is like, it causes a lot of issues, I think, because it's a very convenient scapegoat for people,
Mm.
and they can just kind of blame it on that. And I wasn't in my right mind. But nobody like forced you, down and like poured the alcohol down your throat kind of thing. So again, we have to like take accountability for our actions. I just feel like substance abuse. And so when I say substance abuse, from a diagnostic standpoint, substance abuse would be when someone is using substances to the point where it's like having a major negative impact on a part of their life that's important.
Mhm.
But in regards to relationships, it could just be like a one-time thing that causes you don't have to be drinking every single day in order for it to be a problem in your relationship. If someone's drinking once and making really bad choices while they're drunk or saying mean things or doing mean things, that's automatically an issue. It doesn't have to rise to the level of substance abuse to be an issue within your relationship. So keep that in mind, because that's, I think, another thing that people say, like, "Oh, I'm not an alcoholic," or I
Yeah.
don't abuse drugs. Like, I just do it once in a while. Well, once in a while is once too many if it's causing issues in
Yeah.
your relationship. Um, Okay, so number six is pressure to do anything in an intimate way that you're not comfortable with. And so a lot of abusive people will push this issue knowing that their partner, whether they're young or not, just if you're not comfortable with it, you're not comfortable with it. And like no means no. And that's the end of it. I think there's a lot of like coercion a lot of times in relationships that are toxic. And going back to name calling, they might be like, well, you're a prude, you need to lighten up, you're too uptight, those kind of like breaking you down verbally in order to get what they want from you physically.
Yeah.
And so if you notice any of that stuff going on, again, like that's a huge glaring red flag. Anyone that loves and respects you will be respectful of your body and the choices that you make with it, and move at your pace. No one should be pressuring you into doing anything physically that you're not comfortable with. And it's
Mm.
okay to not be comfortable with the same things that another person is maybe comfortable with. Like that's fine. And you may find that maybe you're incompatible in that way, but that's something that you should be able to decide without being berated or made to
Yeah.
feel guilty or that kind of thing. So, okay. So number 7 is boundary pushing. So one of the surefire ways to find out if the person that you're with is toxic is to assert boundaries, because toxic people hate boundaries. They do not want to abide by boundaries. They don't want you to set them. They definitely don't want to listen to them, and they'll push them. They'll constantly push them. And you have to watch for them making small pushes against your boundaries. Chances are they're not going to do it all at once, because again, these are more subtle things. So it may be, you have a certain boundary and like they test it a little bit just to see how you react. And then based on your reactions, they may test a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more, until eventually the boundary is like totally out the window. So
Mm.
if you notice that someone's kind of pushing your boundaries, if you push back, boundary setting is very difficult, but I think the most difficult part of boundaries is adhering to your boundaries, right? It's easy to like think, oh, well, this is where I stand on this, this, and this. But then if someone pushes them, it's actually difficult a lot of times to be assertive in that moment and like actually stand your ground. I think that's where a lot of people fall down. They're really good at writing them down and figuring out what they are, but they're not great at asserting what they are with the other person. And so that's another thing. Like just keep in mind, if you feel like your boundaries are constantly being pushed or asked to compromise on your boundaries, that would be something that I would consider a red flag for sure. Um, this is a big one. So I worked in domestic violence in outpatient and in an intensive like shelter environment for over 5 years. This is something that I saw all the time and that we would ask everyone upon like intake is, have they ever been abusive towards like your pets or your kids?
Oh,
And a
yeah.
lot of times people would say, oh, yes, he hits me or she, whomever, they put their hands on me, but they would never hurt the kids. And the thing is, it kind of goes back to that. You're either kind of capable or you're not capable of
Mm.
of handling your emotions when you're angry. And also that domestic violence is also completely about power and control. And so what happens a lot of times with abuse is that if they're not getting the outcome that they want, like say they're trying to get something from you or trying to get you to redirect something in a way that is important to them, and they're not getting, even by verbally assaulting you, physically assaulting you, if they're not getting that end result that they're looking for, they may move on then to something or someone else that you care about. And so that might look like the animals or the kids.
Wow.
And so, people have reported stuff, like, oh, my partner's kicked the dog, or, like these are glaring red flags. But I think ones that like people don't talk about that much, they definitely talk about physical abuse towards their partner. Um, but just know that if it's happening to either way, if it's happening to the pet, it can just as easily happen to
Mm.
you. And if it's happening to you, it can just as easily happen to your kids. And, people make a lot of excuses for their partner. And I understand some of the reasons why, but, um, you know, the truth of it is like kids, not only should they not be in an environment like that, it's not healthy for their development, and they learn all sorts of, maladaptive coping skills and things like that if they have a situation where they're not being abused, but witnessing abuse. But they really are in danger of that, them being kind of the next victims of that. So that's a huge one. I saw that all the time, especially with the pets. The pets were like a huge target because they're small and they're, or they're weaker and they're, even if that looks like, I've had reports of them taking like a kitten or a puppy, something kind of helpless, and
Mm-hmm.
throwing it outside, like, and locking the door so that the other person like can't get to them, like just to get their way, basically. So just keeping an eye out for
Wow.
stuff like that.
Right.
Okay, so number 9 would be making excuses for not making time for you or disappointing you, not supporting you. I'm sure everyone has probably heard that saying, and it is a little harsh, but like if they wanted to, they would. And I've heard a lot of criticism about that saying, but honestly, I tend to be pretty direct with my clients as well. And like, I really do feel like that. If that person wanted to, they would. If they wanted to spend more time with you, they would. If they wanted to call you more often or call you, they would. Because if they're not doing it, somebody else will. And you'll find that once you get into a healthy relationship, you'll realize that that stuff it should not be anything that you even think about or stress about. Like, oh, are they
Mm.
gonna make time for me? Or are they gonna be supportive of me? Are they gonna, answer when I call? Or are they gonna call? Like, you don't even think about that stuff when you're in a healthy relationship. And so the fact that someone's like making you stress about little things like that should not even be on your radar. For if it's the right person will want to do all those things for you, and it will be so effortless. You won't have to like harp on them or nag them or any of that stuff. It'll just happen. So keep that in mind. And again, I know it's kind of harsh. Like if they wanted to, they would, but if they wanted to, they would. Sorry. I said what I
Just
said.
saying.
Okay. So the next one is number 10, jealousy. So I used to do a lot of intervention services like for dating violence in schools. And so I was working with like between 7th and 12th grade. And one of the things we'd always ask the kids is like, do you consider jealousy to be a form of love? And almost all of them would always be like, oh yeah, like if he gets jealous, that means he likes me so much. And that is a very kind of younger way of thinking about things. And the reality of that is, and the scarier part of that is, jealousy comes from a place of insecurity with that person. And so it has very little to do with you and has a lot to do with them. And
Mm.
so and again, that power and control. So if they're exerting their jealousy in a way that's making you act or do certain things in order to make themselves feel better about their insecurities, that is definitely not love. That is definitely not a good thing. That it just means they're insecure. And so that's, them being insecure is not in and of itself a reason to break up, but them telling you what to wear or who to hang out with or who to talk to because they feel insecure, that would be in my book. So that would be a definitely huge red flag that a lot of people mistake for like someone liking them or caring about them. And
Yeah.
it really has nothing to do with that at all. Okay.
Mm.
Number 11, constantly accusing you of cheating. And so this is one that I've seen over and over and over. It's like this, they're constantly fighting because the other person thinks that they are cheating on them. And they're like, I'm not cheating on them. Like, I don't know where they're getting this from, but I really do think it's like a cheater's conscience. Like they may be cheating or have like
Mm.
things like that on their mind. And so then they're projecting it onto you. So if you're not doing anything wrong and your partner is constantly accusing you of doing things wrong, one, that would be a red flag to me that possibly they're doing things wrong.
Yeah.
But secondarily, like, you shouldn't be made to feel guilty or bad or change your behavior or whatever for something that you're not doing. Again, that goes back to that insecurity of theirs. And so that's something that they need to work on. And you shouldn't be changing, or having to make concessions in your life or behavior for some perceived thing that you're not even doing. So another thing to just keep in mind. Okay. So number 12, the last one. So leaving you on red, leaving messages unread for long periods of time, not contacting you, or just going like days or weeks, even sometimes without contacting you. This would be a huge red flag. I hear so many people make excuses for this. Um, and so I'm not an unreasonable person, like we all have jobs, we have school, we have things that we're doing,
Yep.
I definitely would not expect your partner to be like in constant contact with you during the day, especially if they're at work or something like that. But if you're going a week without hearing from your significant other, that's not normal, and kind of unacceptable. And it goes
Yeah.
back to that, if they wanted to, they would. Like,
Yeah.
I've heard every excuse in the book, like, "Oh, I lost my phone. I, was in a coma for a week," whatever. Like,
Yeah.
short of that, I really don't find there to be any, like, valid excuse for just going totally, like, off the radar for that amount of time. And again, I'm not talking about like, "Oh, it's been an hour and I haven't heard from them." But if it's like, you're sending a message and like they're using ignoring you as like a form of control, like, "Oh, I'm mad at you, so I'm just gonna ignore you," or "I'm not gonna talk to you." So they're using it as like a tool to work in their
Yeah.
advantage, or if they're just like falling off the face of the planet for long periods of time with no real good explanation, which, maybe in some like freak universe that could happen once, but if it happens more than once, there's really no like actual explanation that would be useful in this particular situation. So I just think it just shows immaturity. It shows that, they're not valuing you as a person. They're not valuing your relationship. And that would be something that I would definitely take as a red flag and to reconsider. So all these things,
Yeah.
some of them obviously are worse than others. Some are more blatant than others, but all of them are kind of big red flags to me. That
Hmm.
would make me really take pause and just consider the person that I'm with, where I see it going, where they see it going, and just kind of reevaluating things. So
Hmm.
that's it. Those are the 12
Wow.
things.
Wow.
So you got your
Yeah.
red flags for the day.
Yeah. So it seems like there are a few red flags that maybe, like you said, gives you pause and you process it.
Yeah.
But there are many that I don't know. It's like run red
Yes.
flags.
Yes.
Like
But you'd be shocked that people don't. They really
yeah,
don't, and they make a lot of excuses. I would add that as a bonus 13. If you find yourself making a lot of excuses for your
yeah,
partner, that would
yeah,
be a glaring red flag to me. Like,
yeah,
you shouldn't have to make excuses for how they interact with you, how they interact with your family, your friends. Like, "Oh, yeah, well, sorry, he's just having a bad day," or, "Oh, well, yeah, he really loves me, but he hardly ever talks to me like that. It's just a once in a while thing." Like, if you find yourself making excuses like that, like, red flag for sure.
yeah.
So
Why do
bonus.
you think, Bree? Just a question that comes to mind. That we as humans put up with these relationships, red flags. Is it fear? Is it the fear of being alone, or
I think that's part of it for sure.
yeah,
I think, it's human nature to get connected to someone, and also I think it's a fear of, like, not wanting to start over. I hear that a
yeah,
lot, like,
yeah,
I don't wanna do this again, I don't wanna
that
date, I don't wanna
uncertainty.
start over. But the thing is,
Yeah,
you don't realize, like, you just accept whatever you've experienced as your normal, and you don't realize what greatness is out there because you've never given it a space to
yeah,
be in your life,
yeah,
and I tell my clients this all the time, like, if you're holding space for this person in your life that is any of these things that I mentioned or just not right for you, you're excluding the other possibilities in your life to come in. There's no space for them. You're holding space for this person, omitting all of the other great possibilities in your life.
yeah,
So
yeah,
it's just something to think of, and I get that not everything is as easy as I make it seem sometimes, like, "Oh, just break up. It's fine."
yeah,
I get
yeah.
that. But, sometimes you have to love yourself and put
Mm,
yourself first and realize that, these things typically are not gonna get better. They just get worse and they
yeah,
compound on each
yeah.
other.
That's a
And,
good point.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's easier to get out of a situation like this earlier on, and that's when you typically start to see some of this
Yeah.
stuff is kind of early on, and so don't ignore it. That would be my biggest tip. Like, just don't ignore it. Take note of it and make changes. If that change means getting this person out of your life, then that's what it means.
Yeah. I love
Being
your,
alone is better than being abused.
yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I love your saying a few moments ago, what you said, make room for greatness.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, Bree, once again, yeah, you knocked it out of the park here. So helpful for your listeners.
I hope so.
Yeah. Yeah. Those who want to get in touch, want to learn more, what's the best way?
Yep. You can call us 239-360-1983. You can go to our website. And there's even a tab on the website that's called Getting Started. And so you just submit your information there for an appointment. And yeah, we've got some great new therapists on board too. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, terrific. Well, Bree, you have a wonderful holiday. Yeah, there. Happy Easter. And
thank you. You
good.
too. Thanks for listening, guys.
Yeah. And we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Mandala Podcast. To learn more about Mandala counseling and health coaching, go to www.mandala-counseling.com. That's www.mandala, MANDALA-counseling, COUNSELING.com, or call 239-360-1983, or visit us on Facebook or Instagram.